The joke lands softly. It's early afternoon in 1934 in a private conference room just off Melrose Avenue, not far from the studios but far enough that the press won't wander in by accident. The windows are shut despite the California heat. The blinds are half drawn. Cigarette smoke hangs in the air in a gray, patient layer. A studio executive leans back in his chair, jacket open, one hand wrapped around a glass that has more ice than whiskey. He smiles when he says it. Let's not pretend we're missionaries. If it's dressed well enough, audiences will buy any sin we sell. A few of the men laugh. Not loudly, just enough. At the end of the table, Joseph Breen does not. He doesn't shift, he doesn't clear his throat, he doesn't interrupt. He simply opens his notebook. The sound of paper sliding against paper is almost inaudible, but everyone hears it. Will H. Hayes, head of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, is seated 2 chairs away. He had spent years assuring Washington that Hollywood could regulate itself, that federal censorship wasn't necessary, that the industry had morals. Irving Thalberg, MGM's production chief, sits across from Breen, precise, controlled, watching. The executive who made the joke notices the silence first. His smile fades slightly as if he's unsure whether he has misjudged the room. Breen's pen moves. He doesn't look up. That is the moment. No raised voice, no reprimand, no threat. Just ink. And in 1934, ink was power. The meeting had been called because the ground beneath Hollywood was shifting. For years, studios had flirted openly with scandal on screen. Adultery, gangsters, seduction, women who didn't apologize, men who didn't repent. Pre-code films had been clever about it, stylish, fast-talking, morally flexible. But Washington was watching. So were Catholic organizations. So were parent groups across the country who believed the movies were reshaping American behavior. The studios thought they could negotiate. They thought they could joke. That afternoon, they were trying to find a way to keep their edge without surrendering control. They had invited Joseph Breen because he was now the man placed in charge of enforcing the production code, not suggesting, not recommending, enforcing. Until that point, the code had been more performance than policy. Written in 1930, ignored in practice, studios paid fines, negotiated cuts, found loopholes. But in July 1934, everything hardened. The Production Code Administration was given real authority. No seal, no distribution, no box office. And Joseph Breen was the gatekeeper. He wasn't a studio man, he wasn't trying to be liked. He had close ties to Catholic leadership. He believed deeply that film shaped souls. He believed America was morally fragile. He believed Hollywood needed discipline. And now he had leverage. But in that room, none of that was said out loud. Instead, a joke about selling sin. Instead, a notebook opening. The executive clears his throat. I'm just saying, he adds lighter now, we're in the business of stories. Audiences aren't choir boys. A few nods, a soft chuckle from the far end of the table. Breen's pen continues moving. Irving Thalberg watches him carefully. Thalberg understands systems, he understands structure. He understands that whoever controls distribution controls survival. He does not laugh again. Well, Hayes leans forward slightly. Gentlemen, Hayes says evenly, the industry has made commitments. He does not look at Breen when he says it, he doesn't need to. The air shifts. Because everyone in the room understands something at the same time. The code is no longer a suggestion. And Joseph Breen does not need to argue. He only needs to remember. What did he write? That question would follow several men out of that room. Because Breen's power did not operate in confrontation, it operated in delay, in letters, in red ink across scripts weeks later. A gangster would suddenly be required to die more clearly, a mistress would need to repent, a suggestive line would be flagged as unacceptable, an entire subplot would be declared morally corrosive. And there would be no debate. Only notes. The executive who made the joke does not know this yet. He thinks this is still negotiation. That power still lives with the men who control sound, stages, and stars. He is wrong. Breen closes the notebook after several minutes, calmly, carefully. He finally looks up. His expression is not angry. It is settled. The code, Breen says quietly, exists to protect this industry from forces that will not be amused by jokes. No one replies. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't have to. The rest of the meeting is procedural, discussions about upcoming scripts, concerns about dialogue, references to specific scenes in development. But something has changed. The laughter does not return. Every time Breen's pen touches paper, someone shifts in their chair. And in that small, controlled movement, Hollywood's balance of power tilts. Because before that afternoon, studios could test the boundaries and negotiate the consequences. After that afternoon, consequences would arrive before release. Quietly, privately, and permanently. When the meeting ends, men stand slower than usual. Chairs scrape across the floor in cautious bursts, cigarettes are crushed out half-smoked. The executive who made the joke lingers by the door. He offers Breen a polite nod, a gesture of mutual respect. Breen nods back. There is no hostility in his eyes. Only memory. Outside, the California sun is bright and indifferent. Studio lots hum with activity, scripts are being typed, sets are being built, costumes are being fitted for stories not yet told. Inside that notebook are lines that may never be spoken. And in the weeks that follow, envelopes begin arriving at studio offices. Typed letters. Specific objections. Clear instructions. Scenes must be altered, motivations corrected, morality restored. No seal without compliance. Producers who once joked about selling sin now gather in smaller rooms, reviewing scripts before they even reach Breen's desk. Self-censorship becomes survival. Not because of a speech. Not because of a public scandal. Because of a silence. Because of a notebook. Because one man understood that control does not require volume. It requires authority recognized by everyone in the room. Years later, few would remember the exact wording of the joke. But several would remember the sound of that notebook opening. They would remember how the laughter died. They would remember the way Joseph Breen didn't argue. And how that was worse. Because in 1934, Hollywood believed it could charm its critics. That afternoon, it learned something different. Charm doesn't matter when someone else controls the seal. And Joseph Breen had already decided how the story would end. The first envelope arrives on a Tuesday morning. It's addressed to a production office at MGM, stamped with the insignia of the Production Code Administration. The secretary who opens it doesn't think much of it. Notes from Breen's office had become more frequent in recent months. Suggestions, adjustments, polite warnings. But this letter is different. The language is formal, precise, final. Several scenes in an upcoming script are deemed unacceptable. A woman's affair must not appear rewarding. A criminal's death must be shown as inevitable and morally just. Certain lines of dialogue are described as low in tone and dangerous in implication. At the bottom, typed cleanly, no certificate of approval will be issued until the above changes are made. No certificate means no national distribution. No distribution means no revenue. The producer reads it twice, then a third time. He notices there is no room for argument, no invitation to discuss, only instruction. He thinks back to that meeting, to the joke, to the notebook, and he feels something settle in his stomach. Across town, similar letters begin to circulate. At Warner Bros., a gangster picture in development is flagged for excessive sympathy toward its criminal lead. At Paramount, a script centered on a woman who leaves her husband for a lover is returned with paragraphs underlined and entire scenes circled. Fox receives a notice about a comedy. Even the jokes are being evaluated now. Double meanings must be removed, suggestive phrasing reworked. The studios had assumed enforcement would be selective. Instead, it is systematic. Joseph Breen does not single anyone out publicly. He does not shame them in the press. He does not hold conferences. He writes. And he waits. In private offices, producers lower their voices. Meetings become more cautious. Scripts are reviewed internally before being submitted. Writers are called in and told to clean things up. Directors are warned that certain shots will not pass inspection. The change is subtle at first, a line softened, A kiss shortened, a fade to black inserted where once there would have been implication. But the fear is cumulative. Because the letters keep coming. And no one knows what Breen will object to next. That uncertainty is its own authority. Irving Thalberg begins implementing quiet safeguards at MGM. Scripts are pre-screened by trusted readers familiar with the code's language. Story departments start asking a new question before greenlighting a project. Will Breen approve this? That question had not existed the year before. Now it determines which stories are told at all. Thalberg understands efficiency. He understands that fighting Breen would cost time and money, delays are expensive, reshoots are expensive, public conflict is even more expensive. So MGM adjusts. Other studios follow. But not everyone adapts easily. Some writers bristle. They had thrived in the pre-code era. They had built reputations on sharp dialogue and moral ambiguity. They resent being told that their characters must repent, that passion must be punished, that crime cannot appear glamorous. One screenwriter reportedly mutters, "We're writing sermons now." The complaint doesn't travel far. Because no studio executive wants to be associated with defiance. The threat is not theatrical. It is financial. Joseph Breen's office becomes a checkpoint. Scripts arrive stacked in neat piles, each is read carefully. Margins fill with notes. Certain themes are flagged repeatedly: adultery, miscegenation, excessive violence, ridicule of clergy, explicit sexuality, even prolonged kissing. Breen is not improvising. He is applying the code as written. The code had always been there. Now it has teeth. And Breen uses them quietly. The executive who made the joke finds himself in a difficult position weeks later. One of his studio's prestige projects has been delayed due to code objections. Investors are asking questions, release dates are shifting. In a private conversation with a colleague, he admits something he would not have said in that room. He doesn't need to shout, he says, he just needs to say no. And no carries weight. Because Breen's authority is backed by more than policy, it is backed by political pressure. Catholic organizations had been organizing boycotts. Legislators had floated the idea of federal censorship. The industry's autonomy depended on proving it could police itself. Breen was proof. To oppose him publicly would risk inviting something worse. So the resistance remains private and ineffective. In studio corridors, the tone shifts. There is less bravado about pushing boundaries, less open talk about getting away with it. The phrase "we'll fix it in post" begins to carry a different meaning. Now it means avoiding a letter from Breen's office. Actors notice changes too. Certain roles disappear, certain character arcs are softened, villains become less charismatic. Women who once dominated scenes with unapologetic confidence now face scripted consequences. The audience will not see the original drafts. They will see the approved versions. They will never know what was removed. But inside Hollywood, people know. They can feel the narrowing. And yet Breen does not attend parties. He does not seek celebrity. He does not give interviews celebrating his influence. He remains in his office, reviewing, writing, approving, or denying. The power lies not in visibility, but in inevitability. When a script is submitted, everyone already anticipates the outcome. That anticipation changes behavior before enforcement even occurs. That is when fear becomes policy. The most unsettling part is the consistency. Breen does not appear vindictive. He does not target the executive who joked about selling sin. He applies the code evenly across studios, which makes it harder to accuse him of personal bias. It also makes resistance futile. Because the rules are clear. And the consequences are predictable. No seal. No film. Months after that meeting, the executive finds himself rereading one of Breen's letters late at night. The language is polite, professional, almost courteous. But it leaves no space. He remembers the sound of the notebook opening. He remembers thinking it was harmless. He understands now that it was a record. And records create patterns. Patterns create precedent. Precedent becomes culture. Hollywood is not being attacked from the outside. It is being reshaped from within. Quietly. Systematically. Legally. In boardrooms, conversations grow shorter. When someone suggests a risky storyline, another voice responds first. It won't pass. The words end the discussion. Not because they are dramatic. Because they are practical. That practicality is the victory. By the end of 1934, the production code is no longer theoretical. It is embedded. Writers adapt instinctively. Directors stage scenes differently. Producers allocate budgets based on compliance. The industry adjusts its imagination. And the adjustment feels permanent. No public showdown ever occurs. No headlines announce surrender. Just letters. Just edits. Just silence. And somewhere in a file cabinet, Joseph Breen's notebooks are filling with neat, controlled handwriting. Inside them are decisions that will shape American storytelling for decades. The executive who once joked about selling sin no longer jokes in meetings. He listens more. He waits before speaking. Because he has learned something simple. The most dangerous man in the room is often the quiet one. And Joseph Breen is still writing. By 1935, the shift is no longer subtle. It is visible on screen. The gangster no longer escapes into the night. He dies decisively, punished by law or fate. The adulterous woman does not walk away fulfilled. She returns home repentant or she suffers. Suggestive dialogue is trimmed into suggestion without implication. Kisses grow shorter. Bedrooms are rearranged so that twin beds sit a careful distance apart. Audiences adjust without being told why. But inside the industry, they know exactly why. They have the letters. Joseph Breen's authority settles into routine. Scripts are no longer sent to him with defiance. They are sent with caution. Production offices begin consulting the code during early drafts rather than after shooting. Entire story concepts are abandoned before paper is even wasted. The fear is no longer about rejection. It is about embarrassment. No producer wants to be known as the one whose film was denied a seal. No studio wants headlines questioning its morality. The industry had fought too hard to avoid federal control. And so the self-policing becomes internalized. The executive who once laughed in that meeting now opens scripts with a different instinct. He scans for risk before he scans for quality. He calculates moral compliance alongside box office appeal. He would never describe it as fear. He calls it prudence. But he remembers the silence. Irving Thalberg, ever pragmatic, treats the code as another production parameter. Lighting, budget, runtime, moral clarity. He ensures MGM's prestige pictures comply without appearing sanitized. He learns how to imply without statting, how to suggest without crossing lines. Other studios develop similar strategies. A new language of cinema emerges. Subtext grows more important. Camera angles do more work. Dialogue becomes sharper within limits. Constraints in some cases breed innovation. But innovation is guided by restriction. And restriction has a name. Joseph Breen never needed to make himself popular. He needed to be indispensable. He corresponded regularly with Catholic leaders, reassuring them that Hollywood was reforming. He communicated with studio heads in measured, professional tones. He believed deeply that he was protecting American audiences from moral erosion. He saw himself not as a censor but as a guardian. That belief gave his authority calmness. He did not act like a tyrant. He acted like a man convinced of duty, which made him harder to confront. For some filmmakers, the code became a creative adversary. Directors like Ernst Lubitsch found ways to layer suggestion beneath restraint. Writers sharpened dialogue so that meaning existed between words rather than within them. But even these subtle rebellions occurred within the boundaries Breen maintained. The line was always there, and everyone knew who drew it. The executive who made the joke experiences a quieter consequence. His reputation shifts. He is no longer seen as forward-thinking or daring. He becomes cautious. He rejects scripts he once would have championed. He warns younger producers not to invite trouble. Years later, he would insist he had always supported moral standards, that Hollywood needed discipline. But in private moments, he remembers how quickly power moved away from the men with cameras to the man with a pen. He remembers how silence felt heavier than confrontation. The code's influence extends beyond individual films. It shapes entire genres. Crime dramas must reassure audiences that justice prevails. Romance must reinforce the sanctity of marriage. Authority figures cannot be ridiculed excessively. Clergy must be treated with respect. Stories become structured around moral restoration. For 2 decades, American cinema reflects that architecture. And most viewers never question it. Because they do not see what was removed. They do not see the scripts rewritten in quiet offices. They do not see the deleted scenes never filmed. They do not see the projects abandoned in early drafts because someone in development whispered, "Breen won't allow it." They see finished films. Polished. Approved. Sealed. The production code seal itself becomes a small emblem of reassurance. It appears at the beginning of films, subtle but authoritative. It tells audiences that what they are about to watch has been judged acceptable. It also tells studios that survival depends on compliance. Joseph Breen remains in his role through the late 1930s and into the 1940s. His correspondence fills archives, his notes grow more detailed, his influence shapes not only content but tone. He does not shout. He does not appear on screen. He does not star in headlines. But his presence hovers over every screenplay. In 1945, after more than a decade of enforcement, Breen steps down from his position at the Production Code Administration. The industry he leaves behind is different from the one he entered. The pre-code era feels distant, almost reckless in retrospect. Younger filmmakers grow up within the system he solidified. They assume its boundaries are natural. It would take another generation and another cultural shift in the 1960s for the code's authority to erode. But in 1934, none of that was visible. What was visible was a man opening a notebook. There was never a dramatic showdown. No studio rebellion that toppled his authority overnight. No fiery speech that declared artistic freedom restored. The code weakened gradually decades later, replaced by a ratings system as social attitudes shifted. But the memory of how it began remains unsettling. It did not begin with scandal. It did not begin with chaos. It began with composure. With a joke that underestimated power. With a man who understood that enforcement does not require anger. Only leverage. If you step back and look at that afternoon in 1934, it seems almost small. A private meeting, a careless remark, a quiet reaction. But history often pivots on moments that feel minor at the time. The executive believed he was speaking from a position of control. Hollywood had money, stars, influence. Joseph Breen had a mandate. And a notebook. When he chose not to laugh, he signaled something final. He was not there to negotiate. He was there to remember. Long after the smoke cleared from that conference room, long after the men who sat at that table were replaced by others, the structure he enforced remained embedded in American storytelling. Generations of viewers absorbed narratives shaped by those early decisions, morality coded into plot, punishment written into arcs, redemption required before the final fade out. They never heard the joke. They never saw the silence. But they felt its consequence. Because for decades, Hollywood learned that the most dangerous correction is the one delivered without raising a voice. The sound that changed everything was not laughter fading. It was paper opening. And a pen beginning to write.